This is the video for Chapter 16, Section 3, The Californios. Before getting started on the lesson, we need to look at the scale. Remember, assess yourself before and after you complete the section. Go ahead and assess where you're at now. While you're assessing yourself, I'm going to explain the 3, or the learning goal. The learning goal for this section is to be able to understand the Californios' impact on California and be able to explain some of the legacies they left behind, or what they left behind that would impact the future generations. That's the learning goal for this section. Let's also go over the few things you need to keep in mind. Like, first, the lesson essential question. What were the motives, hardships, and legacies of the group that moved west in the 1800s? So, the group we're talking about in this case would be the Californios. So, what motivated them to move there? What hardships did they face? What legacies, or what did they leave behind that impacted future generations in the 1800s? Also, the section essential questions. Remember, you need to copy these down and the correct answers, because this will help you study for your test. Number 1, in the 1830s, what was California's main industry? Number 2, who were the ancestors of the Californios? And number 3, what was one legacy of the Californios? There's only one vocabulary word for this section, and that's rancho. A rancho is a land grant made by the Mexican government, used mostly for raising cattle and crops. You mainly find these in like California, maybe a little Arizona, down over in the area that was part of the Mexican cession land. Over in that area, you'd find large ranches, which is it is made up of an area of land that the Mexican government gave to people so they could herd cattle. Because remember, the more business you have in your country, you're able to tax the business, and then you're able to have your country grow. So they would give this land to them, and then they would have large cattle farms. So a rancho is a large ranch. Not the place in Zephyrhills where you sink your trucks. So this is a rancho, and this is not a rancho. When Mexico won its independence in 1821, California came under Mexican rule. In 1833, the Mexican government closed all the missions. Half of the mission's lands was supposed to go to the Indians. Mexico, however, established its own system of land grants in the Southwest and gave most of California's mission lands to soldiers and settlers. The typical Spanish-speaking Californian, or Californio, was granted a rancho of 50,000 acres or more. And remember, a rancho is a vocabulary word and is a land grant made by the Mexican government used mostly for raising cattle and crops. Life on the rancho was a combination of hard work and the occasional fiesta, or social gathering. Most families lived in simple adobe houses with dirt floors. The Californios produced almost everything they needed at home. Indian servants did much of the work. The ranchos were so huge that neighbors lived at least a day's journey apart. As a result, strangers were always welcome for the news they brought of the outside world. During weddings and fiestas, California celebrated with singing, dancing, and brilliant displays of horsemanship. In the 1830s, cattle ranching became California's most important industry. Cattle provided hides and tallow, which is beef fat, that could be traded for imported goods brought by ship. Among the goods that an American sailor named Richard Henry Dana carried to California in his trading ship were teas, coffee, sugars, spices, raisins, molasses, hardware, dishes, tinware, cutlery, clothing, jewelry, and furniture. Because California was so far from the capital in Mexico City, the Mexican government neglected the territory. Soldiers were not paid, and they took what they needed to survive from the people they were supposed to protect. Officials sent to govern California were often unskilled and sometimes dishonest. In 1846, the United States captured California as part of the war with Mexico. Before long, the Californios were a minority in California. Still, the Californios left a lasting mark. California is full of Spanish place names such as San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. The Californios also introduced many of California's famous crops, such as grapes, olives, and other citrus fruits. But most of all, they opened California to the world, and the world soon rushed in. So, let's go back and relook over the section essential questions. Number 1. In the 1830s, what was California's main industry? Remember, cattle ranching was the main industry in the area. They had large ranchos, or land grants from the Mexican government, that were then used for either farming or cattle ranching. But cattle ranching was the main one. Number 2. Who were the ancestors of the Californios? Remember, the ancestors of the Californios were the Spanish that had originally conquered all of South America and Mexico. And number 3, what was one legacy of the Californios? The legacy of the Californios was all the Spanish city names they left behind in California. Okay, now that we've covered the information, you need to make sure you've completed your scales, marked before and after. You've done the vocabulary for the section. You've completed the interactive notebook questions, and you've copied down the correct answers and the questions for the section essential questions. Once you've done that, you've completed this section.